Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Welcome to the Wind Up Watch Fair in our new home here at Center 415 in New York. Thank you so much for coming out nice and early. This is the first live recording of Openwork and Worn & Wound joining forces together in podcast form. Asher, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for coming out at 10:30 after a long night of drinking, I'm sure. So I am Asher Apkin, co-founder of Collective Horology.
And I'm Zach Kazan. I'm the managing editor at Worn & Wound.
So this is a little different than we normally do things. Normally, when we were recording Openwork, it's me and my partner, Gabe Riley, sitting across from our table, trying to edit out the sounds of a truck beeping behind our office. So we don't have to do that today. Instead, we'll have the glorious sounds of New York City and two incredible people here to join us. So for those who are not familiar, Openwork is a podcast looking at the inner workings of the watch industry. And of course, Worn & Wound is a podcast looking at the culture and the daily happenings in the watch industry. So we're going to try and explore a couple of topics from both of those perspectives today. Before we do, I'd love to have our guests just introduce themselves for those who don't know them, and then we'll dive right in.
Okay, if I start. I'm Martin Frey. I'm the chief designer, founder, co-founder, and co-owner of Urwerk. Yes, that's it. Thanks to be here.
And my name is Jonathan Ferrer. I'm the designer and founder of Brew Watch Company here local in New York.
Well, it's 10:30 on a Saturday, so let's get to business. Both of you come from very different places from a design standpoint, literally in the world. However, I would argue both Brew and Urwerk are design-driven brands at their core. I'd love to talk just a little bit about the intersection between brand development, so what it means to actually project what you are thinking about, what your brand means to the external world, and design, and how you think about how those two things connect with one another. Because not every brand perfectly aligns between how their product comes to life and how they communicate what they view as their value to their market. So, Jonathan, I'd love to start with you. When you were starting Brew, or even just now as you are deep in it, how do you think about how design and brand intersect?
This is such a deep question. So thanks, Asher. This is something before I even hit the sketchbook was a big concept that I had to take into play because I didn't want to just have another race car watch. I didn't want to have another space watch. I wanted to have my own vision, my own voice within the watch industry because it's such a vast industry. So I literally asked myself, what is something that I can relate to and connect with and believe others would also feel the same way? And I said, oh, well, every person, a lot of people enjoy their time over coffee when they're out after work with friends, dates, meetings. I'm like, it's kind of like this intersection between the day-to-day lives of so many people. So I said, all right, that would be an experience that I'd like to tie into. All right, concept one. And then, of course, when it comes to the design, what are relevant timing periods that I'd like to tether into? And what I'm really saying here is every part of the design, every part of the brand has narrative, has reasoning, and has meaning, rather than just another stamped out round watch that exists in this vast industry, which gets lost. And when I wanted to start this, I wanted to come out with a bang. I wanted to be bold, but not just for the sake of being different, but with reason and something that I could, of course, connect to and be able to share myself.
When I'm hearing you say, forgive me, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please.
Oh, but thank you. What I'm hearing you say, and I think this is where I'd love to turn to you, Martin. Jonathan's talking about how brand is essentially falling out of product, if I'm getting that accurate. So what you defined and what you created is now giving way to how the brand is articulated and how it comes to life, whether it's through the marketing, whether it's through media, whether it's through the shorts that you do on YouTube, TikTok, et cetera. In the context of Urwerk, where the design language has been from 1997 on, I think, very, very, very clear in its vision. How has your design language impacted the way that Urwerk as a brand introduces itself to new clients?
Well, I would say that, of course, these two things: the watchmaking and also the design. Those are both engineering disciplines. It's not that much of a difference. You have different functions. You have the inner functions of the movement, and you have the functions that communicate or that protect what's inside. And so I see these two things not that much different. They're very much interlinked. And for us, of course, from the very beginning on, and how we started is actually with the different time indication. Different time indication somehow informed my design. But I realized that when we work with this different time indication that was suggested by the watchmakers, that enables me to do the watch differently, to create a different watch. So, but that somehow began kind of like an interplay, like a back and forth, like a ping pong game between the engineers and, or let's say the mechanical engineers, the watchmaking engineers, and the design engineer. So this is this game that we are playing. But it's very much like woven into each other. These two parts, so these two sides of it.
I wanted to ask you, Martin, about starting the brand in the late '90s and the early 2000s. Obviously, the watch media landscape is very different than it is now. We have, I think, a pretty mature watch media at this point. I'd like to think there's a lot of different websites covering the watch industry in different ways. What were some of the challenges in kind of like bringing your vision to to the larger larger public of watch consumers in that early period, and how has it changed? And Jonathan, I'm curious, how it's changed for you starting your brand, so much later in comparison in a much more mature media landscape. Martin, if you could take that first, that'd be great.
Well, we used to listen to a single of the Rolling Stones. Time is on your side. No, when we started, we were not thinking, too much about what's, and actually it's still the same. We don't think too much about the future. We are doing it now, and you have to just face the problems. And the engineers, the way they do it is actually just if there's a problem, to make a good thing out of it, right? So you take things at the time. That's what it is. And of course, times are different, but that's actually it can be easier maybe depending on the time you start. I imagine. But maybe you don't know exactly at the time you're doing this if it's difficult or not. At least in our case, we were just pretty naive, starting, just beginning doing stuff, and then you insist. And it was at least 6 years at the beginning where we didn't earn anything with it, basically, and we had to invest, and nobody knew us. That's the way it is. So if you enjoy what you're doing, you try to find a way. But I did many other things. Artwork. I was actually at the very beginning, I was not that much, a watch designer. I studied art, I did art, and that is more like with video, with film, so I was busy with other things as well. And then slowly but surely, after a couple of years, it started to become more important. But step by step. That's why I call our process actually of doing things an evolutionary process. It's like growing step by step, and you resolve the problems that are in front of you. Basically, it's no big concepts of how to do it or study the market and things like that. Actually,
I'm curious if we roll back the clock to 1997, 98, 99. So much of the watch industry was anchored at Basel World, and these large fairs and events. And I have to imagine that during those fairs at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a set number of media that were present, and that media had their schedule, and that was it. And here you are, you've got Patek Philippe and Rolex and all these other brands, and here you guys are in the corner, with all these other guys who are making, crazy watches. How did you get attention? What did you do to get anyone to come over and to look, let alone care? Like, what was the process?
For us, the chance was, of course, that we were invited to be part of the Independent Watchmaking Academy. And Felix was, working for Sven Andersen. at some point, and it was the big person for that independent watchmaking academy. They had a booth or a stand at the Basel Fair, and so we had the chance to exhibit our first watches. There were 3 watches at the very beginning, right? So, and we presented them on a heating plate, just to show something hot. And everybody was like, "What are they doing? What is this? It's unusual." But that's it. So we had the chance to show it there. And Basel World, of course, was kind of it's in a way it's a pity that it doesn't exist anymore. We don't need it as much anymore as we used to. But it was really kind of a moment, kind of like a ritual that somehow, had things driving. It happened every year, and we had to go to this ritual. It demanded us to exhibit our watches, so both ways. But yeah, so it was very different. The whole industry met at that big fair. It was kind of also extremely tiring and annoying. But on the other hand, everybody was there. So the industry got a feeling for itself. And especially later during COVID times now, I understood that it's something very important that one meets, in person, and that one has the time to somehow see what is this industry that you're, a part of.
But for you, Jonathan, in 2015, when you're launching your brand, how are you getting people to notice your brand? What's your strategy?
Well, I was just thinking about this. Actually, when I was in school 14 plus years ago, I actually had an artwork on my wallpaper in school. So even before I was in the industry, I set myself up for this exact moment.
So you literally had a pinup of Martin.
You manifested this.
I did manifest this. Yeah,
I like that.
It was amazing. It was the case back, the turbines. That was my wallpaper. So I planted myself here over 14 years ago. So how did it change from 2015 till today?
Yeah, how did you, in 2015, you're starting your brand. How do you set about getting people to notice your brand? Are you taking a proactive approach with media at that point? Is it more of a bootstraps kind of grassroots thing? What's your strategy?
It was a mix of everything. So I would go to Basel World. I would go to the press lounge and tuck my flyers in the magazine section, even though you're not supposed to. I would do everything bootstrapping to get my name out there. Of course, that wouldn't work, but you meet people along the way. 2 things that really changed over the course of a decade for me was my marketing refined as much as my product did. So when you look at, let's just say, a graph of my brand over the past 10 years, you'll see the audience grow and the brand grow, however you measure those metrics. And that growth, I would affiliate with my watches getting more refined. So the design, the way they feel, the way that they're received, but also my marketing. So I realized it takes time to realize your narrative and how it gets shared with others. When I first started, I said, I have to look and appear as I'm this big brand for people to take me serious. And it wasn't until 5-6 years in that I realized my greatest asset was just being myself and sharing the most honest and transparent story of, this is just a young guy, has a great idea, a great concept. And that story resonated with people. People wanted to dig deeper. They said, oh, have you always been interested in design? And so the very honest, authentic story for me and the brand was the one that people engaged with best. So comparing early years, which is just cold object photos, to today where it's full narrative videos on what's a day in the life like, what are you designing? So the transparency in the story has come through.
Was there a moment when you realized that when that transition happened, when it became more, I don't know if I call it personality driven, but you appear now in so many of your social media clips and you're truly the face of the brand.
You're the head of customer service.
I am, but I'm so comfortable now because when I first started, everybody told me, and everybody was wrong. They said, don't show your face. You're going to corner yourself. Everybody said, seem as though you're bigger. We, the team, us. And then the truth was, it was one guy, again, doing all these different parts. And I said, why not expose that? And people realized that it was a real journey.
Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like, doing it by yourself for the first couple of years at least? Because you really did, you're mailing packages from your
I'll give you a quick nutshell because it's a lot. So everything from design, sketches, Adobe Illustrator, 3D printing, engineering the drawings, working with multitude of manufacturers for prototyping. You get it, photography, marketing, website, analytics, trade shows, running to these lounges and slipping your flyers in, and finding people that can assist along the way, such as Worn and Wound, and people that would gravitate towards my vision, down to quality controlling the watches, servicing the watches, boxing them up, taking returns and sending, you name it. That multitude of processes I was managing. Of course, 10 years later, I'm trying to alleviate some with help, but it was a lot.
I want to look at two things which I find really interesting, because when you start talking about the way the brand was introduced, and I think, and you talk about, I mean, correct me if I'm characterizing this incorrectly, but there was a little bit of luck or a lot of luck, and then some stunt, right? Like, oh, we're going to put it on a hot plate. We're going to see what happens. We're going to do anything we can to get somebody to pay attention. And that, am I characterizing that accurately?
No, absolutely. That's exactly how it was. It depends on, what's on what your plan is when you start. If you have this clear idea, I want to become a watch brand, and I want to become this and that, it's very different from how we started.
Well, this is what I'm curious about, because this form of attention economy has evolved dramatically in the 20-year span between your two brands. So in this case, you're competing for the attention of a select few who hopefully will amplify that story to people that might become passionate about collecting Urwerk.
It was still the old-fashioned way, I'd say, without the internet, that much yet. That was really something that was different, that also helped us then in due time. Of course, it's extremely important also for us and for the way we got to know. But at the very beginning, it wasn't that. It was really like the circle of watch people, coming to a watch fair, looking at something, and then word by word, so to say, or mouth to mouth. It's somehow the message spread with that.
So
it took a while. It took a moment, for.
So you guys almost had opposite approaches into a similar point, which is to say, you guys started by speaking to not only press, hoping to amplify, but also a core group of collectors that might have gotten really excited and might become, hopefully, the ambassadors of your brand to other folks and grow it on a slower basis.
What really helped, real quick, maybe too, was of course that the Revolution magazine was just created around the same time. And so we had also, and that was also kind of old-fashioned because it was a magazine, it was but they as the name Revolution says, they were also interested in doing it differently, in advertising watches differently. So with Wei Co, we had really a person who was happy to see some cool new stuff to somehow have it in his magazine, and that helped us a lot. But of course, it is also the fact that we did the Opus 5 project, that then it was shining a bit of a light onto our creation of 103. So we had that watch ready, but that gave us a bit more
it's interesting for those who don't know, like the Opus series was a project through Harry Winston, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was at that time managed by Max Booster. Yes,
absolutely.
So sort of nascent idea of partnership leading to broadening an audience, which is interesting because, of course, I suspect a lot of people who were looking at Harry Winston watches probably weren't thinking about Urwerks. So giving them that opportunity to explore it was fascinating. Jonathan, I'm curious. You were born into a digital era where the attention economy, if you will, is very different, and you had access to mass media at a much more affordable rate that you could control in a way that wasn't available in 1997. So you're sort of starting not only literally 20 years later, but also at a very different point. However, your competition is like ridiculous. There's significantly more brands. There's so much stuff competing for attention in the world. There's tech companies that are out there that are screaming for your money to try and get you to support them. So even though you had access to every eyeball in the world, you talked a little bit about how you just evolved your design, or how you communicated from cold product shots into trying to express from yourself. So I'm just curious, what were the lessons that you learned along the way there from a marketing standpoint about what was effective with people when you're competing with everybody, as opposed to trying to capture the attention of a select few who will then become your advocates?
Great question, Asher. Well, first, I could start with, I shouldn't have survived this long because it is such a massive industry. And there's just, at my price point, countless watches out there, countless brands. There's a new one born every minute, right? So how do you stand out? I would say there's two definite things that were in my favor that I did. I did one thing, which was going to a lot of these events, whether it was Red Bar or other events in the city. And what I would say that is for me is a trickle down effect. So if I was able to please these folks that have the Urwerks, the MB&Fs, the Paddocks, whatever you name it, the trickle down effect for me, which was if I could appease these people with my product, that would trickle down to the masses in a way where if this person's spending six figures on that watch and they're happy, and on the other side, there's a Brew watch for $400 or $500, and it gives the same emotional reaction. They're triggered in a positive way, and they have kind things to say about it. Well, that tier will trickle down to the masses over time. So that was one thing that was in my favor. The second, of course, was digital media. And the thing that was in my favor, which was I was the demographic I was marketing to. So I had that short attention span myself. I knew from flipping through social media what worked, what didn't. And so I kind of knew how to steer that course on how to grab people's attention and keep it. And of course, funnel my story through. But I would say it's difficult. Like now I search for my brand. I see all these other brands are bidding on my name. I'm like, look at these guys. This is like, brand with an F in front of it. And I'm like, that's like a huge conglomerate and they're bidding on my name. It's like, how do you compete with the lords of the industry? But I would say the underdog has such an opportunity now more than ever in the past to stand out and thrive in this industry.
Do you still think of yourself as an underdog at this point?
Yeah. So when people come in here, Brew, and then they name every single version I've ever done, like that, I can sleep happy. Literally, I'll go to sleep with a smile on my face. But when I go outside, it's interesting actually. When you go outside, nobody knows or cares, I would assume, who Brew is. But, funny enough, they go in the city sometimes and they're like, oh, is that a Brew on your wrist? And then they look up, they're like, Jonathan? I have no idea who these people are. And
you're on billboards.
Well, I did that for fun, but I'll be honest, billboards don't actually matter because, back to the digital era that we're in, like you look at a billboard, you forget it. You should be driving. So everything is on your phone. People are on their phone more than they're driving while they're driving.
Which is unfortunate, probably.
Yeah.
Do not run ads while people are driving.
No.
But now we come to the modern day where both Urwerk and Brew and the brands that are in your cohorts now you're on equal footing. Now you're a digital brand. You're a digital brand, even if you guys were born in different eras. So now, in some ways, even if you're coming from different places, you're competing on the same grounds, and you're competing not only for obviously clients and you're competing for their attention, just to be able to share, at least in my opinion, what makes you special. I mean, we talked a moment ago about what it means to have design fundamentally define your brand. We talked about how that comes out to get people's attention and how that was different in your eras, but now you're on the same page. And what I find interesting, and when I think about Urwerk, for example, is some of the ways for which you command attention through product. So for example, for Only Watch, the clock that you created,
the space-time blade?
Yes, the space-time blade. I remember looking at this in the context of the catalog, and I started laughing because it was, 100 incredible watches, and then Urwerk made a lightsaber, and it was just like the way that you decided to have the product fundamentally command the attention was so clear. And I'm curious, is that intentional? Like, do you think about that, like the context of what you're making or the context of where something will be seen? Or were you going to just make, the space-time blade anyway, and it just happened to fall into that particular collection?
I mean, one let's say for us, one good thing is that we are really a small brand, actually, with 20 people. And, we have we're quite exclusive. Obviously, we don't produce that many watches. So in a way, advertising, we should not do too much, in a way. Not too much advertising, We don't need to have a lot of people. It's great if a lot of people like it, but we don't really need to look for it. You know.
Are you being coy though, or are you really not? Or do you really not think about how the product sits when it's sitting
No,
across?
okay. Of course, we just like to make cool stuff, you know. And
Sure.
we when we have a thing like the only watch, we want to show something special, you know. That's clear, something different. That's maybe since the very beginning our path, you know, to do it differently. It's not the only path, obviously, but you know, not that many do it. And so that's actually what we do, you know. What we like to do, you know. Surprise people maybe with something, but then again,
Oh, you surprised me.
with that, but then also have this kind of you know, like evolutionary process.
Yeah.
Where you somehow you can maybe imagine how a future Urwerk will look, but it will look a bit different, and still it will look cool. That's of course important.
So there could be more lightsabers, is what you're saying at some point.
Well, what we really like, and that's from the beginning on, we have our time indication is inspired by a table clock from, you know, 1650 around. The Campanus brothers, they created this clock, you know, that's in Renaissance times. And this special time indication is, of course, very important to us. And it gave us somehow, from the beginning on, it gave us this direction to do it differently. It's like a different time indicator. We have so much, you know, so deep inside of us, we have this kind of pictogram-like, you know, time image of the watch with hands. That's somehow how we imagine time, right? That's how it looks. And if you do it a bit differently, that is with this different time indication where the hours indicate the minutes as we do it, you somehow are puzzled when you see it first. And that's kind of an advertising already.
Well, you're also talking about how the way that you design transcends form factor, which is really, really interesting to me. That the design language that you have, if you think about the way like most people approach Only Watch, which obviously is an incredible charitable thing, but it's also it's a showcase. It's a huge marketing opportunity. The way you approached it, you know, most people do.
If it works.
It's just a different podcast topic, but the way that you were approaching it was to say, I'm going to have Urwerk represented and the product and the brand represented through a core design language, rather than the way that a lot of other people approached it, which is to say, I'm going to make a variation of an existing watch that fits into the theme. You went several layers back. So I'm curious, Jonathan, when you think about design and product in the context, and this is a good example upstairs. I mean, there's 100 and how many brands are here?
140 plus.
Okay,
brands.
so wow. So 140 brands up there. As people walk by, and there's incredible, amazing things to see, but it can be overwhelming. What do you think defines your brand through the product that you have up there? Because it's, and to a certain degree, it's not too dissimilar from Only Watch. 100 and some odd lots of attention being pulled. How do you command attention, and how does your design language affect that upstairs?
Very simple. At the base level, it's the silhouette of the watch. We would always play these games when we were designing watches. We would design it on the computer, we would print it out, and then one of us would Sharpie out the silhouette, and then we'd hold it up and say, hey, can you tell me what brand is this? And no, it was just another round watch. You think of Urwerk, oh my gosh, you know it's an Urwerk. Like you could tell by the silhouette. So silhouette is always a good strength card for recognizability as your DNA. Of course, our colorways, our silhouettes, the brand, and the faces. Those are huge. But, you know, tethering back to what you were talking about before, I think it's important to have these, I would call them hero products, something that shows your capabilities, your flex points, so to speak, right? Like this Only Watch that you're mentioning. How do you stand out from the rest of the crowd? I think every once in a while it's important to flex, to just show your capability. And this is, you know, we're extending the topic a little bit here. And something I'm thinking about now that is opening my eyes, it doesn't even matter if it's a revenue driver. Hopefully you don't lose too much money, but like I'm playing now with more experimental concepts of materials, the way you tell time. It's no Urwerk by any means, but the idea of, you know, showing your capability as a brand over an extended period of time is super important. Otherwise, you get lost. Again, people see, they recognize, and that's good for a short period of time. But I think the longevity of the brand is showing your capabilities and your vision, whether it's an Only Watch or here and there as you progress.
No, go ahead.
Before we wrap up in the next few minutes, I'd love to just talk a little bit, and this is the business guy in me, about how two independent brands approached some, and I don't want to make assumptions, but speaking as a small business owner, I've been there, so I suspect all of us have at one point gotten to a point where some element of pressure has come in. You're running out of money. You are, maybe the sales aren't where you want. Something isn't happening the way you want to, and you have those moments where you look at yourself and you start to question. I'm sure that.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, exactly. So, because you guys have spent the last 40 minutes talking about your dedication and your belief in what you're doing and how you're doing it, what did you do, or what have you done in those moments when it's not working and some external pressure is telling you this may never work? What do you do to keep going?
Okay, so I said at the very beginning, this first 6 years were really pretty hard. And so that's actually how we started. It's from that moment, that kind of mood that we started. So 6 years, we had to somehow find out how to do it. And that somehow, it never got worse than that, So it's all good. Yeah.
Fair enough.
How about you, Jonathan? You've talked about kind of like underestimating the financial needs of kind of like running a watch brand in the early going. What were those moments like for you, and what kind of like levers did you pull to get things on the right track?
My benefit was I was young and I started with no money. And so over the time, I respected money and I learned how to use it as a tool, but I still to this day don't care about money. So I pretend money's not real. It's just a tool to get to the next level, right? So it's just credits for me to make the next watch, the next materials, the next flight to X country to share the vision. And so the less I treat money like money and the more I treat it like credits, like a tool, I've failed and succeeded so heavily. Now I would say I have a pretty good template on what I need at this point. It's like 10 years deep, right? But you're never stable. And I would conclude with, I pretend every launch, every product, everything that I do is the last time. So how would I do it if it was really the last time? And that little bit of a thought makes me put 110% into that step.
Yeah, it's interesting. Gabe and I have talked about this in the past. And for us, when we started doing this, we were very optimistic. And we were very lucky. I mean, I often talk about the fact that I don't know that I would have had the balls to ask you to work with us now versus when we did 5 years ago, because there's a certain power in ignorance and naivete. But what that also led to was this belief that only ever asking yourself, what's going to happen when something works? So if you evaluate a project and you say, if this works, the outcome will be however many credits, or the outcome will be, the ability to gain more attention or what have you. But I never asked myself, and in fact, this is something that I've heard from a lot of other colleagues in the industry, well, what happens if this is an abject and utter failure? And it's a question that I think a lot of creative people don't like to ask, because of course nobody gets started to fail, but it's such a critical component of the journey of building a brand or something. And then it brings up this really fascinating rhetorical question, which is, if you ask yourself, here, what will happen if it's super successful? Well, we all know what that outcome looks like. But if you ask yourself, what will happen if it's an utter and abject, miserable failure? What then? Because the other, one answer to that is, well, I'll just stop. But of course, none of us want to do that. So if we look just for a moment there, at the lowest point for both of you, what made you continue to the next step?
Oh, yeah, I'll take that. It was in year 4 or 5 where my greatest failure was my greatest success. I had terrible, terrible times with manufacturers. It was all going downhill. Product was at an all-time low. It was terrible. I wasn't sending anything out, and I was just losing. At the time, I thought it was a lot. It was just hundreds of thousands of dollars down the drain. So for a young guy at that stage, that was a lot. And it was crippling to the point where even my family says, you should, close up shop and get a job. And I remember sending fake interview resumes to Fossil. I didn't want to work for Fossil, but to appease my parents. But the silver lining was I was forced into a corner. You'll hear this from every entrepreneur. Your greatest failures are usually where you succeed. I stopped and I thought it was super calm. And I reached out to a few folks, and I found till this day, my greatest manufacturing partners, who are like my family, have taken care of me. And we've been doing amazing work together just because I failed so hard in the past.
Well, I think it's again the engineer mindset, that helps in a situation like this. So the engineers, as I got to know them and as I'm myself, when something goes wrong, when something doesn't work exactly the way you imagine it or the way you maybe planned it or thought it would happen, when there's a problem coming up, then get creative. That's exactly the point. So you try to solve the problem and make something good out of it. And that's the way to do it, of course. And also the other idea, what you said, actually, that if money is not the main thing, if you're concentrating on doing your thing, creating something and making it, and if that's also what you get out of it, the pleasure that you get out of it. But if money is not somehow the driving thing behind it, then that's the way to do it. You will find a way to solve the problem, and you will enjoy that, solving the problem. But that's the way to look at it, just to try to enjoy that. And the engineer shows you how to do it. That's the mindset of the watchmaker.
That's a great answer. I think it's interesting to kind of hear like the similarities and like how you guys both kind of take that question from different perspectives. I think we can probably close it out by bringing it back to the to the collector community. This is Wind Up. This is a big watch collector event, at its core. So to close it out, how do each of you stay in close contact with your collector communities? I think each of you have obviously like very dedicated core bases of collectors who've supported you from the very beginning and continue to support you. What's your strategy for remaining close to those communities today? Martin, if you want to take that first.
Yeah, no, of course, that's extremely important. And especially during COVID times, we realized how difficult it can be when you can't meet people in person. So if you have, even though we did our project on the screen, like in the, COVID times, our COVID project, it still works, one can do it, but it's not so easy. We have met quite a long time after, we did our project. And so that's something that is, of course, extremely important to see people in person, to meet them. What we do, we organize our dinners, we travel, and we go to events like this, or like the one that we at Gotham Hall, so we just meet people. I find it super exciting to show the watches, it's also partly why we do it, because we want to get some echo, people like saying I like it, but also maybe people criticizing it and say, well, I would have done it maybe differently, so you can learn from it. But it's not that you then, after that, shape your new plan after, somehow the demands of people, but you see how, how the people react on it, how your friends and fans maybe, how they react on it. So it's really the interaction. You need to see people in real, and show the watches that they can touch it, wear it and like it, hopefully.
How about you, Jonathan?
Naturally, social media, I'm there. And I've talked to some people that have millions of followers. And I would ask them, I say, how do you manage all these DMs, messages, and comments all the time? And they would say, I do it myself. I said, you don't have a company? I said, no, I do it. And that's one thing I never removed myself from, because I never wanted to have a wall between me and the end consumer, in this case, fans and audience members. So I still do my best to answer everybody on social, email, and go as far as to even give my phone number out, even though my partner, she says, don't. I give out my phone number, and I'll take phone calls and texts. But I think most importantly, and fortunately, being in New York City, going to different events, touching base physically, seeing people, is like a huge benefit for me.
Yeah, even in the age of the internet, I think there's really no substitute for like getting out there and like being at a watch event. There's something special about that.
I prefer to just comment on watch articles.
Yeah. Is that you, the keyboard warrior, just commenting? Yeah,
Indeed.
I knew it was. Martin Fried, Jonathan Fair, thank you so much for joining us. Asher, first live podcast. Congratulations. This is a big step in a
Thank you all for coming so early in the morning.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
as a special bonus, the floor is open to you guys. So if you wish to go upstairs and start visiting with some brands, you have early access to do so. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.